All right, what is up? So check this out. I'm up here at the University of Utah's think tank, or at least one of their think tanks, and I just got this question. Don't cows consume too much water? Now this is a question I get a lot, and it's important because I want you to know the truth. Cows can't catch a freaking break. First, there was the nutritional argument against saturated fat and cholesterol, which is basically an argument against meat. And now cows are consuming too much water? So I'm going to give you my short conversational answer, and if you stick around, I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. Now today, cows and bison and other ruminants do pretty much the same thing they've done ever since they've been on this freaking planet. And yes, even in conventional farming situations, because cattle spend the majority of their lives on pasture, they move across the land consuming vegetation, transforming that vegetation into their flesh, which becomes food for omnivores and carnivores, all the while putting back into the soil water and nutrients and microbes, fertilizing the soil, creating new soil, and most of their water consumption comes from water that naturally falls on the land and that they consume through vegetation, just like it's always been done. Now, when making this argument against cattle, the numbers typically quoted for water consumption are almost always exaggerated and usually incorporate the total amount of water consumed over the cow's lifetime, which doesn't take into consideration the different types of water. Only a very small percentage of the water that cows consume are from precious sources that need to be irrigated. And by the way, it takes less of this valuable water to produce 1 pound of beef than it does to produce 1 pound of any of the edible agricultural crops. You can see this. If you drive around and check out a cow pasture, you rarely see those big massive sprinklers happening. But anytime you see an agricultural crop, you always see those big massive sprinklers going. So here's just a little bit more detail. There's a distinction between the different types of water used to determine a food product's water footprint. There's green water, which we might consider to be neutral water because it's precipitation-based water. The rain is going to come, the soil's going to absorb it to some degree, and the plants are going to grow whether the cows are there or not. And then there's blue water. Blue water is the thing that we care about the most because blue water represents the water in lakes and rivers and reservoirs and aquifers, and this is the water that's typically irrigated. Now, like I've already said, most of the water that cattle consume is water that's already there. In fact, 95% of the water that cattle consume over a lifetime is this green water. And by the way, cows enhance green water retention because they contribute to soil that holds onto water better. Only less than 5% of the water that cows consume is from this precious blue water. Plus, cattle occupy land in its pristine condition. You don't have to modify the land. In fact, cattle occupy land that wouldn't be fit for crop usage anyways. As I've already mentioned, they help to rebuild the soil. An estimated 30% of the water they consume goes back into the soil through urine and feces. And then again, remember why we're raising cattle in the first place. Pound for pound, beef is one of the most nutritious foods you can possibly consume. Now, if you look at crops, especially compared to beef, if you look at total water consumption, sometimes crops may appear to beat beef out. But that's a manipulation of the numbers because it includes green water. Pound for pound, it actually takes more of this precious blue water to produce the main edible agricultural crops. In fact, irrigation of crops takes up over 70% of the world's fresh water withdrawals. Plus, the way that most of these crops are farmed, they are not rebuilding the soil. It's the opposite. Through monocrop agriculture and repetitive farming, most crops create hard impacted dirt that does not hold on to water and contributes to runoff and soil depletion. Plus, in a lot of situations, in order to grow these agricultural crops, you have to manipulate the land, you have to flatten it out. And that adds even more to soil impaction and runoff. Plus, a lot of these crops require massive amounts of fertilizer, pesticides, and herbicides. And nutritionally, there is no comparison. Pound for pound, beef beats any one of these agricultural crops in bioavailable protein, vitamins, and minerals. The only thing beef doesn't beat these crops in is carbohydrates. Now, this is not an argument against crops. This is an argument for beef, in defense of beef. And why do we hear so much BS around cows being bad for your health and bad for the planet and inaccurate information like how much water it takes to produce 1 pound of beef? Because it's propaganda, it's agenda driven. Think about it. Anytime you see a mainstream narrative, consistent messaging across the mainstream news, the government, organizations and corporations, there's a reason that they're all on board saying the same thing. They've got a vested interest in it. So if you've been skeptical of any of these organizations in the past about anything, what would make this any different? It's gotta be suspect. And use your common sense. When you see these beautiful animals out in the pasture, are they really the problem that they're made out to be relative to all the other problems that we see in this modern world? Now, I truly believe that there's a push for you not to eat meat because it makes you strong. So if you want to be strong, clear-minded, vibrant, and resilient, eat meat. And as you're doing so, know that it's not just good for you, it's good for others around you, and it's also good for the planet. Now, if you want to change your life, you need to change your diet. And I put together this simple step-by-step masterclass I call my 21 steps. Check it out. You can also schedule some time with me. We can talk about anything you want, including applying for masterful nutrition and health coaching. Keep it real.